Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time, we're going to be tackling anxiety.
Oh, yeah.
That feeling we all get, but, we don't always necessarily understand.
Right.
And we're really looking at some stuff that suggests a whole new way of thinking about it.
Yeah.
And we've got some research studies and even some transcripts from therapy sessions and expert opinions
Well,
that all point to this kind of different way of looking at it. And
that's really cool.
it's not just about feeling less anxious, right?
Huh?
It's about living a more fulfilling life
Yeah,
because of how we approach anxiety.
that's right. And
Yeah.
kind of moving away from that, fight or flight mentality
Right.
and more into how acceptance can really help us unlock a life that aligns with, the things that we care about the most, our values.
Yeah, and that almost seems counterintuitive, right?
It
You
does.
would think, like, why wouldn't we just want to get rid of anxiety altogether?
Yeah, get rid of it.
But let's take a quick look back at, the more traditional approaches to anxiety,
Uh-huh.
like exposure therapy where you gradually face your fears or, cognitive restructuring where you're
Yeah.
challenging those negative thoughts.
hmm
And
Those have definitely helped a lot of people,
oh, sure.
but they don't always tell the whole story.
Right. And some critics would even say that they
Yeah.
kind of oversimplify
I
anxiety,
do.
focusing mostly on just our reactions to triggers
Right.
without, fully recognizing how complex, our thoughts and our language play in that whole experience.
It's like we're only looking at the engine of a car when we're trying to figure out what's wrong with it, but maybe we're missing a flat tire.
Right. Or a broken taillight or
Yeah, exactly.
there's more to it.
Yeah, so even if someone's anxiety symptoms like decrease,
Yeah.
that doesn't necessarily mean that they're.
That their quality of life is better.
Yeah,
Exactly.
that's what you're saying.
Like you could still be functioning with pretty low levels of anxiety, but still not feeling fulfilled.
Yeah,
Right.
right. And so that's what these new approaches are really trying to focus on is
Yeah.
how can we not just, feel better,
Yeah,
but how can we actually live better?
I like that.
And that's where this idea of acceptance comes in.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Now, break this down for me.
Okay?
How does accepting anxiety lead to a better life?
Okay, so imagine you're caught in a rip current.
Okay.
Fighting it makes you more exhausted.
Right.
Doesn't actually get you to shore.
Right.
But if you learn to float and kind of ride that wave, you can conserve energy and you can actually, swim to safety eventually.
Yeah.
That's what acceptance is like with anxiety.
Okay.
It's acknowledging those uncomfortable thoughts and feelings,
Right.
but not letting them control what you do.
That's a great analogy.
Thanks.
But how does that play out in real life though? So
Well-
so let's say I'm anxious about public speaking.
Mm.
How does acceptance help me actually deliver that presentation?
Well, let's think about what usually happens when you get anxious about public speaking.
Okay.
Do you, avoid it completely?
Sometimes, yeah.
Or do you spend hours rehearsing until you're, exhausted?
I've been known to do that.
Yeah. And that's called experiential avoidance.
Okay.
And it's basically just trying to escape those uncomfortable thoughts and feelings,
Okay.
which can actually keep us stuck.
So how do we break free?
That's where these therapies come in,
Okay.
like acceptance and commitment therapy
Ah.
or ACT
Okay.
and functional analytic psychotherapy or FAP.
Okay.
These approaches help you change your relationship with the anxiety,
Okay.
not necessarily eliminate it altogether.
Okay.
You learn to coexist with it
Right.
while pursuing a life that actually matters to you.
So I might still get, butterflies before I speak, but instead of letting them stop me, I'm just going to focus on my message
Exactly.
and connecting with the audience.
Exactly. And that can be really powerful.
Yeah.
Like in one study, researchers had people practice acceptance during this panic-inducing experiment. Yeah, so it was like a controlled anxiety trigger.
Okay.
And the people who embraced acceptance actually reported less anxiety than those who tried to suppress their feelings.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
It goes against everything we try to do when we're
Exhausting,
anxious.
counterintuitive.
Right.
Yeah.
But there's still something I'm not quite grasping.
Okay.
You mentioned something called relational frame theory.
Yes.
How does that tie into all this?
Okay, so relational frame theory, or RFT,
Okay.
is really all about how our amazing human ability to use language
Okay.
can actually make us more susceptible to anxiety.
Really?
We learn to link words and thoughts with feelings.
Okay.
And sometimes we kind of fuse with those thoughts,
Okay.
treating them as absolute truths
Okay.
instead of just passing mental events.
Gotcha.
So imagine someone tells you public speaking is terrifying.
Okay.
And now every time you think about public speaking,
Yeah.
that feeling of terror
Mm.
might pop up automatically
Yeah.
because you fuse those two concepts together.
Okay, so like our minds are creating these anxiety traps
Yeah.
based on how we've learned to relate to certain words or experiences.
Exactly.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
And those traps can keep us stuck in these cycles of avoidance and distress.
Oh, that makes sense.
But the good news is we can learn to kind of defuse those traps.
Okay.
That's where these therapies come in and really shine.
Oh.
And they give us tools to like recognize those traps and step out of them.
Okay, so instead of being controlled by our anxious thoughts, we learn to relate to them differently.
That's right.
But how does that actually translate into living a better life?
Right.
You keep mentioning values, and I'm really curious how that fits into all of this.
Yeah, so values are like your internal compass, right? They guide you towards what really matters in life.
Okay.
Like if anxiety is the storm values are the anchor that keeps your boat from drifting off course.
I like that.
So these therapies help you identify those core values, the things that give your life meaning and purpose. And then they empower you to act in ways that align with those values, even when anxiety shows up.
So it's not just about feeling less anxious. It's about living a life that feels meaningful
That's right.
and fulfilling, even if anxiety is part of the experience.
Exactly. And that's what makes it so powerful.
Okay.
It's not about eliminating it entirely because, let's face it, that's probably not realistic
Right.
for most of us.
Yeah.
It's about learning to coexist with it
Right.
in a way that lets us live a rich and satisfying life.
That makes a lot of sense. It's almost like we're shifting the focus from, anxiety being the problem to be solved to values being that guiding force.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like saying, okay, anxiety might be along for the ride,
Yeah.
but I'm still steering the ship towards what matters to me.
Right. I'm starting to see how this can be really empowering. But
Yeah.
how do we actually figure out what our values are? Is there like a specific process for that?
There is. Therapists often use a tool called the Valued Living Questionnaire,
Okay.
or VLQ,
Oh.
to help clients identify and prioritize their values. It's like a roadmap for figuring out what truly makes your heart sing.
I love that. A roadmap for the heart.
Yeah.
So the VLQ helps you figure out what's most important to you.
Mm-hmm.
And then these therapies help you figure out how to actually live in alignment with those values.
Exactly. And sometimes the answers might surprise you.
Really?
Like, for example, someone might say that family is their top value,
Okay.
but they're constantly working late and missing out on family time.
Right.
That disconnect can be a major source of distress
Right.
and even contribute to anxiety.
It's like an internal conflict
It is.
where your actions aren't matching your heart's desires.
Exactly. And that's where the therapeutic work comes in,
Okay.
helping clients bridge that gap. It might involve setting boundaries, making changes to their schedule,
Yeah.
or even just having honest conversations with loved ones about their needs.
So it's about aligning your outer world with your inner values.
Yes.
Even if it takes courage to make those changes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that alignment is where the real magic happens.
Okay. This is all starting to click for me.
Good.
But what about, those of us who struggle with more generalized anxiety,
Mm-hmm.
where it's not tied to like a specific situation or trigger?
Right.
I'm thinking about things like generalized anxiety disorder or GAD,
Yeah.
where there's this, constant worry and tension, even when things seem okay on the surface.
That's a great question. GAD can be particularly challenging
Yeah.
because the anxiety feels so pervasive. Traditional cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT,
Right.
has been effective for GAD,
Okay.
particularly when it comes to things like relaxation training
Okay.
and challenging those anxious thoughts.
Okay.
But even with CBT, some people still struggle.
Right.
And that's where acceptance-based approaches can add another layer of support.
So it's about combining the best of both worlds,
Yeah.
using CBT techniques alongside this newer focus on acceptance and values.
Exactly. And research is showing some promising results with this approach.
Oh, okay.
For example, mindfulness-based stress reduction, or MBSR,
Okay.
which teaches you to observe your thoughts and feelings without judgment, has been shown to reduce anxiety symptoms in people with GAD.
So it's like training our minds to become less reactive
Yes.
to that constant
Yes.
worry.
And a key part of that is understanding that worry often serves an avoidant function.
Okay.
We worry to try and prevent bad things from happening,
Right.
but it can actually keep us stuck in that cycle of anxiety.
It's like that saying, worrying is like paying interest on a debt you might not even owe.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah, you're spending all this energy on something that might not even happen.
Right.
And it's draining you in the present.
Exactly. And that's where values come back into play.
Okay.
By connecting with our values, we can start to shift our focus from avoiding discomfort
Right.
to pursuing what truly matters.
Okay.
So instead of being consumed by worry about hypothetical future scenarios,
Yeah,
we can channel that energy into actions that align with our values.
I like that.
Spending time with loved ones, pursuing a creative passion, contributing to our community,
Yeah.
things that truly enrich our lives.
This is really resonating with me.
Good. I'm
It's
glad
like
to.
we're reclaiming our power by choosing how we respond to anxiety
Yes,
rather than letting it dictate our actions.
exactly.
But I'm curious about something you mentioned earlier, functional analytic psychotherapy,
That's
or
true.
FAP.
Hmm.
How does that approach leverage the therapy relationship itself as a tool for change? So it sounds like FAP takes a really unique approach. How does that work in a therapy session?
Well, think of the therapy room as like a laboratory,
Yeah.
a safe space to observe those anxiety patterns in action.
Okay.
FAP therapists pay close attention to how you interact with them during the session.
Okay.
So they might notice that you tend to like people pleaser
Okay.
or avoid certain topics or get defensive when they offer feedback.
Right.
These are all clues to how you might be interacting out in the real world.
So they're using the therapy session like as a microcosm of your life experiences.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And by identifying those patterns in the moment,
Okay.
they can help you understand how those behaviors might be contributing to your anxiety
Right.
and keeping you from living in alignment with your values.
So if I'm someone who constantly seeks reassurance from others,
Mm,
the FAP therapist would like point that out as it's happening in the session.
exactly. And they wouldn't just point it out.
Right.
They'd work with you to explore the function of that behavior.
Oh,
Like, what need is it trying to meet?
okay.
What are the potential costs and benefits?
Right.
And then together you'd experiment with different ways of relating.
Okay.
Perhaps practicing expressing your needs more directly, or learning to tolerate uncertainty without seeking reassurance.
So it's like they're giving you real-time feedback
Exactly.
and coaching on how to navigate those tricky interpersonal dynamics.
Yes. And because you're practicing these new behaviors in the safe space of the therapy room, you're more likely to start using them in your everyday life.
Makes sense. Now, there's another approach mentioned in the research, functional experiential cognitive diffusion,
Yes.
or FECD.
That's a mouthful.
It is. How does that differ from FAP?
So FECD is a really interesting approach because
Mhm.
it blends the strengths of FAP with cognitive therapy techniques.
Okay.
It acknowledges that sometimes our thoughts do directly contribute to our anxiety,
Right.
but sometimes it's more about how we're relating to those thoughts.
So instead of always trying to change our thoughts, we learn to change our relationship with them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's where those mindfulness and cognitive diffusion techniques we talked about earlier come in.
Okay.
FECD therapists might use techniques like labeling thoughts,
Okay.
imagining them as leaves floating down a stream, or simply noticing the sensations in our bodies without getting swept away by the story our minds are creating.
So we're like detaching from those anxious thoughts and just seeing them as mental events
Precise.
rather than like absolute truths.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And as we do that, we create space for more flexible and adaptive ways of responding.
Right. Do you remember the example of Mr. D from the research who struggled with anger?
Yes, the one who discovered his anger was often triggered before he even had any conscious thoughts.
Yeah, exactly.
Through FECD, he was able to shift his focus from trying to control his thoughts to becoming more aware of those physical sensations that were signaling the anger building up.
Okay.
This allowed him to develop healthier coping strategies
Right.
like taking a break or practicing deep breathing before the anger escalated.
That's a great example of how understanding the function of our, thoughts and feelings can help us make different choices.
Absolutely. And that's the ultimate goal of these approaches,
Yeah.
to help us live richer, more fulfilling lives, even in the presence of anxiety. It's about recognizing that anxiety is a normal part of the human experience,
Right.
and it doesn't have to define us or limit us.
This has been such a fascinating deep dive.
Yes.
We've learned so much about the limitations of those traditional approaches to anxiety
Right.
and the power of these newer acceptance-based therapies. It feels like a real paradigm shift
It is.
in how we understand and approach mental health.
Yeah. And what's most exciting is that these approaches offer practical tools and techniques that anyone can use
Right.
to cultivate greater acceptance,
Right.
live in alignment with their values,
Yeah.
and ultimately create a life that feels both meaningful and authentic.
Absolutely. It's not about erasing anxiety altogether, but rather learning to dance with it,
I love that.
to navigate those, inevitable bumps in the road with grace and resilience.
Beautifully put. And remember, the journey towards a more fulfilling life is an ongoing process.
Right.
Be patient with yourself, practice these tools with curiosity and compassion, and most importantly, never stop exploring and learning.
Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today. This has been incredibly insightful.
It's been my pleasure.
And to our listeners, we hope this deep dive has sparked your curiosity and empowered you to embark on your own journey of acceptance and values-driven living. Remember, you are capable of living a life that feels both meaningful and authentic, even in the face of anxiety. Keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep.